welcome to another episode of BIA, Kelsey. Live, I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. I'm your host, broadcasting today from an office in Salt Lake City, not my usual home office. We're joined, of course, by Mike Oland, our chief analyst, and today Abid Chaudhry will not be able to join us. He's getting a visa to visit another country, so it turns out it'll be just us. And as always, we are going to be doing our news summary, but we're also going to be joined in a few minutes by the executive team of Yellcast, and I will be doing an interview, and apparently I'm in somebody's room and they think they're going to use it, so hopefully they won't push me out while we're talking. So first off, Mike, it's been an unusual week in news and media. We're starting off today talking about our own BIA Kelsey local media forecast, but there's been a lot of activity going on, and I think that the changes that we report this week are interesting to think about in terms of how local is going to be changing over the next couple of years. So in 2017, we're projecting $148.8 billion in local media spend in the United States. And what's particularly interesting is that early in 2018, we see the digital and traditional media crossover happening. That is, the digital will overtake traditional media across the local media landscape, in addition to the national media landscape, where it's already done so. And what's happening as well is that media is continuing to grow and grow quite healthily. So over the next 5 years, we see average growth rate of about 2.4% overall. However, in digital video, and even in broadcast video, we're seeing a real increase, up to 9 to 10% a year, and in online video growth over 25%. And also, we're seeing a significant change, and I think it's one that we're going to touch on several times in the news conversation today, and that is that traditional over-the-air and print advertising revenues have continued to fall, and this year we're actually far below expectations because of the unusual spending patterns of the presidential campaign. And that's where I want to look across all of the news stories today, is about some fundamental changes going on in the economy and the way that we sell within the economy. So Mike, this year, particularly the Donald Trump campaign has not spent as much money on TV. They've got $140 million spend going into the next 2 weeks, but that still leaves them way, way behind what they previously spent in the past. Yeah. A lot of it's going to social. What does that tell us about how particularly traditional broadcasters and newspaper publishers should be thinking about the decline of political advertising along with the decline of marketing advertising over the next few years? Is this a key turning point? Is 2016 truly unique in American history, won't be repeated, or is it actually a sign of things to come for media generally?
Well, I think it's an ongoing trend that is moving towards things like social, as you point out, which at its root, I think, indicates a trend towards content marketing. And a lot of that comes down to the sensibility of millennials, which are, of course, a major voting populace, in addition to being a consumer group that is increasingly empowered. Millennials are largely untrusting of traditional forms of advertising. That includes lots of banner ads. That includes lots of things that we see in traditional print advertising, towards things that are more content-oriented or appear to be more kind of genuine. And that is what you see in kind of the inherent advantages of things such as native social ads. Native social ads is interesting because the forecast that we're talking about, I actually cover the mobile piece of that. And that's something we're going to save for another discussion, because I'm working on a report now that's kind of the drill down of mobile and how that's shifting those overall numbers. But I mention it here because within that mobile portion, we're seeing this very interesting trend where we're moving away from traditional display, which is, banner ads on your smartphone, towards this native social kind of format, which essentially is things like Facebook newsfeed ads or ads within Instagram that kind of merge with the content better. And also it's a scrolling feed, right? So there's an inventory advantages to that. But that aside, kind of back to your larger question, I think we're seeing that move towards this kind of native social advertising, which is interesting in the shifts that you mentioned in moving from things like newspapers, magazine, broadcast, but also in terms of just ad spend overall. Because in a lot of cases, half of that kind of social marketing happens when you're paying with your time in kind of managing your social presence as opposed to a traditional ad buy. The other half of it is indeed an ad buy to drive traffic to those Facebook pages and things like that. But it's an interesting concept, and I guess back to your original question, I think that's a sustainable trend that isn't just kind of a blip,
Right.
and we're going to see that continue.
Well, so, thinking back over the course of the campaign, because I think that's an interesting, and I don't want to take sides in this, but if you look at the way that Hillary Clinton has addressed millennials, she's done it pretty subtly. She did it most explicitly in the third debate where she said, Google it. And in fact, a whole bunch of people did Google what she suggested they want to go to look at, which was Trump's record on women. That she then took those responses, weaponized them as social media, and distributed ads primarily on social media rather than primarily through television. In fact, the social media amplified the television investment. And I think that's where we're headed in terms of thinking about laying the groundwork of your story, whether it's a marketing story or a political story, so that that history is discoverable by that very skeptical voter who is coming of age now.
Yeah, and I think that's a good example of the content marketing we're talking about. It's really just taking real kind of comments and then, using them. I think it's a good example of content marketing as opposed to kind of contrived marketing messaging, or in kind of political speak, like when it's, either they're going negative or positive. Either way, it's just that kind of contrived kind of messaging that just doesn't land with millennials. So I think that's a good example of that. And also, she mentioned Google, and I was glad to see that she didn't say the Google, which is generally the way it's phrased when it's kind of disingenuously mentioned as like a buzzword in those types of contexts. So maybe she knows what she's talking about, maybe not, but it's funny when you see that. The Google.
The participle has been abused more than anything in this election and almost any time in history. So, but you're bringing up the next point, which is our second story today is Google Access, which is the Google Fiber project. Had a pretty disruptive Wednesday or yesterday. They fired their CEO, who will remain on board to advise Larry Page about how they might go forward, but they did not name a new CEO of Fiber. So Craig Barrett is leaving, and it doesn't appear anybody's taking his place. They've announced that they have halted rollouts of fiber to new cities, and that there are going to be layoffs in the group. Google's been investing in being not simply the content channel, but the physical channel for a lot of people. In a lot of cities in the United States, you've had actually be providing free or very inexpensive bandwidth. Does this slow Google's progress as a result of the fact that they can't build out that channel?
I think, I'm going to take a devil's advocate role here and say don't count out Google Fiber yet. And I would put in that same category Google Project Fi, which is kind of the wireless service version of what you're talking about. It's very analogous to fiber, and you're right. They want to own the pipe as well as own the content, and I think that brings them closer to users. A touch point with users they have always enjoyed on the desktop through search. I think this all goes back to search's deterioration on mobile, simply because people spend more time in apps than they do on the mobile web, where search is the front door. So this is one of many different kind of battlefronts Google is fighting to basically own users or own that touch point with users. If they are the service provider for internet, that just positions them better. Same thing with Project Fi in wireless. Now, I think that the turnover here, the executive turnover, what you're kind of, I think, implying from a new successor not being named is a fair point. I'm not sure what's going on there, but I think that, really, I think this all comes down to the higher degree of accountability that all the moonshots are now getting after they kind of reformulated the company with Alphabet. Where these are all different startups with their own P&Ls, no longer an internal project, and they now have more autonomy, which is good, but also accountability. So I think that's a move towards maybe hitting the reset button on Project Fi. I don't believe we've seen the last of it, and I wouldn't count it out because I think, for all the reasons I mentioned before, it's going to be a very important part of Google's like many, many different efforts just to kind of maintain that touch point with consumers.
Well, so Fi is actually, I think, where they probably are going to refocus, because
possibility.
And I believe a big portion or a big part of this decision was the AT&T Time Warner merger.
Yeah, that's probably true too.
which broke over the weekend. It's got to have them thinking about the physical pipe and whether or not there's a defensible value there. On the other hand, ubiquitous wireless would be a much more attractive offer. So I think that's probably what you'll see is fiber will be used for connecting to the head ends, getting into the neighborhoods, but it will not be something that they're going to push out to each household.
Yeah.
And that seems where we're going.
It could be that hub approach, or it could be something where they're targeting enterprise or just kind of larger consumption bandwidth customers as opposed to like a B2C play.
So let's turn finally to retail. So HRC Retail Advisory, which is a strategic retail firm, released a study that shows several interesting things about Amazon's progress in retail, and particularly how difficult it is for traditional retailers, physical retailers, to compete with them. And a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Project Como, which is Amazon's upcoming physical brick and mortar approach, which will be small destination stores, highly curated, designed to drive up and pick up something as well as to stop and pick up a perishable like fresh fruit or vegetables or dairy. And then essentially that'll be a curated space. I believe very much like Trader Joe's. What HRC found was that Amazon's top line growth rate in terms of the amount of merchandise is growing faster, 3 or 4 times faster than the rest of the retail industry. They're adding it at 32% more merchandise per year. And their top line growth is at 31%. On the other hand, the companies, the traditional retailers who are trying to compete with them are seeing their growth slow. They've cut down the number of stores they're launching. They are actually closing some stores. Walmart, for the first time, is closing more stores than it's opening. And what this study really gets to is the fact that if you want to be Amazon's competitor online and off, that the online sales ultimately need to be run very closely and carefully, or it will destroy your margin.
Oh, yeah.
And so, again, disruption, 2016, we're seeing a lot of changes here. As retail space becomes less in demand because more companies go purely online or focus on delivering services locally rather than having people come to them, how does that change the media mix, particularly with regard to the local media that we were talking about in our own report going forward? Do you expect any changes that we haven't currently projected as a result of this? A decline of retail advertising, a decline perhaps of retail investment, but more online e-commerce and service commerce investment?
Yeah, good question. So first, as a qualifier, data points like this that come out tend to create like a Chicken Little effect. The sky is falling when it comes to brick and mortar business. So if we pan back, brick and mortar, physical retail still is, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, about 93% of overall U.S. consumer spending. So all this e-commerce, this entire discussion we're having happens within that kind of 7%. So just as a qualifier, but it's still very important. So what we're talking about is retailers that have their revenue mix split between their in-store revenues and their online revenues. Now that online portion, you're right. I mean, they're competing against Amazon, so they need to really treat that as either a loss leader or adjust their expectations of the margins they're going to see, because they're really going to have to cut prices to compete with Amazon. Now, depending on that mix, the percentage of a given store's revenue that's coming from their retail storefront as opposed to e-commerce, that is going to have an implication on ad spending, because retail physical spending tends to be in places such as newspapers, radio, other things like that, whereas online retail is huge when it comes to SEO and SEM. Amazon is a major spender when it comes to search engine marketing, and I think that's kind of the battleground online for getting traffic, is a lot of SEO and things like that. So I think that the outcome of this decision is going to impact whether that kind of digital channel, in terms of ad dollars, in terms of demand generation, happens online versus traditional media. Yeah.
Well, so, and I think what we're going to see here, and it was interesting to note that the more successful retailers here reported between 9 and 19% of their sales online. And one of the things when we talk about that 7%, and I've seen as high as 10% from Mary Meeker at KPMG,
Yep.
or at Kleiner Perkins.
KCPB.
Too many Ks.
KPCB. Yeah, go on.
But anyway, a lot of retailers are actually over performing and yet still struggling in their e-commerce, and that's an interesting point, something that we really need to keep in mind. I think your emphasis on SEO and redirecting some of that spend to SEO is going to be really important.
Well, it's also a lesson in don't rely too heavily on your e-commerce as a portion of your revenue, because that portion is going to drag down your average margins. Because again, it's going to be something that is increasingly decreasing in margins as you compete with Amazon on that space. So instead, increase the share of your overall revenues as a retailer with brick and mortar, because that's where you have an edge on Amazon in terms of a unique value proposition, a buying experience, all that stuff. So, you're choosing to compete with Amazon in their front yard, which I think is a mistake in terms of a larger share of your overall revenues that are coming from e-commerce. I think it should be treated as a necessary evil for a lot of retailers. Definitely do it, but don't rely on it as a kind of revenue driver, or at least in terms of your overall.
It's revenue that may be evil.
Yeah, there you go.
It could actually hurt you. And thinking about whether or not you're making that kind of poor investment is going to be really important to retailers going forward.
Well said.
So let's change gears here and bring on our guests for today, Peter Negulescu and Kate Nobel, excuse me, because Peter says it that way, and now it's stuck in my head.
Sorry.
And you guys are, and by the way, Peter is joining us just on voice because he's on a wireless connection. You all are with Yellcast, and Yellcast is a company that we brought on stage about a year and a half ago at our first BIA Kelsey Now conference on local on demand. I, at the time, believed that you guys had the most disruptive pricing model and one of the most attractive approaches to advertising going forward, with the idea of demand-based search. And what I'd like you to do is first start off and tell us about what demand-based search is and how has it evolved since we first heard from you guys on stage last year.
Thanks. First of all, thanks for having us on, Mitch. I don't think, I think what's evolved for us is not necessarily the base product, which is when somebody is looking for something, and really specifically local, we provide a very simple and affordable way for the businesses and the customers to connect and interact. So the basics haven't changed. I think what we're looking at is really what categories is this going to work for? As you were just mentioning, evil revenue, right? Are we going head to head against Amazon, or are we looking at things that are more specifically and inherently local? And I think, this is right now, where we've evolved since we last talked is we've actually launched our product, and we've launched in a single market in Santa Fe, which Kate is going to talk about in a minute. And what we're doing is actually learning, how can this really service the businesses? How can we actually create a buyer-centric market? There's nothing out there that's buyer-centric right now.
Well, tell us how your search works. I think that's an important component of
absolutely. So what we've really done is create what we call a connection engine, and we call it that because it combines the power of search with the power of communication, with a little bit of a twist in there. So it essentially turns local searches into what we like to call conversations through a single, nice, unified experience. So I wish I could give you a demo, but I'll quickly describe how it works.
Those of you who'd like to try it, go to yellcast.com. You'll be able to try it online on the web service, and if you'd like to download the app, it's available for both iTunes.
Actually,
and,
there's no
app.
It's no app, Mitch.
Oh,
I
had an app.
It's just
that. Oh wait, you're right. I was using my
keeping
browser.
It as simple as possible. It's a nice, responsive design. Works everywhere. So yes, please, Mitch. I agree. Have everybody who's listening in go and use it. So here's how it works. So a user search. So user searches for what they want, and they express where they want it. So we have a search box and a location box, and we return relevant local results that we pull from multiple sources across the web, including our own directory. What's interesting about this, there are no ads, and businesses can't pay for prominence. So, as is really common practice in the other search engines and directories. Plus, we don't track users. So, these these are
You
some
don't
of the
track
users.
users. What does that mean? No
What it means
surveillance.
is, yeah, I mean, from a user experience perspective, is we're giving the control back to the user, right? So they are now in control of their personal information. They can decide when and where and how they share that information. They're not constantly tracked and faced with ads on something they may have been looking for 6 months ago. So we've cleaned up the overall user experience. But what we like to say is we're giving people back their internet. We're creating the experience that the internet was supposed to be. So on the search side, that's all very nice, and they get locally relevant results. Now here's the twist. Users can save time by selecting multiple businesses directly from the search results and then contact them all at once with a single request. So instead of the user behavior where somebody calls up one business and then the next business and then the next business and they repeat their request over and over again, we allow you to basically broadcast your request out to the businesses that you selected. So there's complete transparency in who you're sending your request to. At the same time, we anonymize that request so that that business does not get your personal contact information until they decide to actually get back to you. So,
and the way that they do that is they get a whisper call, right?
Correct. So that is sort of the connection communication piece of this. So, businesses receive basically an anonymous request via phone, text, or email, depending whatever contact preference they've set up. Or if we just have their phone number, we'll automatically send a text and a phone call out at the same time. And then they respond via whatever preferred contact method the user prescribes. So if they said, I want to only get text messages in response to my request, then they receive that back via text. And then the connection is made. So what happens is the businesses can decide who they want to contact. So they'll read the request and go, oh yeah, I can provide that service for that person, or I have that product. And then they decide to connect. And that's the point at which they actually pay for the connection. So what's neat about the business model is we've taken SEO, we've taken SEM out of the equation, complicated ad campaigns. We've leveled the playing field for the businesses. Businesses don't even need a website to actually get discovered on Yelpcast.
That's a really important point. You could serve somebody who just has a phone.
Correct. So you were just talking about the big players and the big retailers, which I thought was very interesting. And we're sitting here going, wait a minute, what about the little guy? How do you level the playing field for them? And also,
you don't think we think this through, do you?
Yeah, I think maybe just a little. But I think it's more important to note that in all of this, in actually creating the simpler platform for the seller, we've actually created a buyer-centric marketplace, right? So we don't need to track them. We don't have the overhead of advertising and all of that stuff. And that's what is really unique about our business model.
Well, and the price that you pay when you actually get connected is much lower because it's based on not on having had to accomplish a whole bunch of impressions, but the cost of the one call.
Exactly.
And so it transforms the cost of advertising.
And
so
we're looking at in the neighborhood of $1 or $2 for the connection for most businesses. Right. Yeah. So it's going to be extremely inexpensive. And to your point, the business is only paying at the point where they decide to actually spend the money and connect to a customer. Right?
Well,
they're not
no
paying
one believed.
Yeah.
No one in the audience believed the numbers when we allowed. They said you couldn't do it. You couldn't make money on that. And I really think that that's one of the reasons this is so disruptive. Now, the other thing you're doing, and Katie, let me bring you into the conversation as well, is you're launching in one market. We're not doing a national launch here. You are in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and you are deeply engaged in the community. How are you doing that? What's that launch look like?
Well, the idea is that Santa Fe is small enough, fiercely local enough, and diverse enough that we can truly saturate the market, get enough stores, sellers online, get enough consumers using it, that we can really see what the technology can do and how people use it, because it's a pretty robust tool. And really what it is a tool for connecting buyers and sellers in a local economy according to their intention. Mm-hmm. So all of what you talked about in the first half of the broadcast is very relevant, given that we are really trying to create a substantive story here, have the authenticity of content where all of us, myself included, are sort of learning about it. I had some aphids invading my guest house, and I took pictures of these bugs and sent them to the pest control businesses that I found on Yelpcast and said, what are these and do you have a remedy? So there's added value in the content there. And they got back to me and said, okay, we're going to have technicians look at this and get back to you with what they think we should do. So it's great, saved me a lot of time. And what we're doing really is trying to, through more traditional means, through radio, through display ads with the local paper, build awareness. Build awareness and tickle people's interests about the local economy, because Santa Fe is a high mountain desert town with a very big name, but the metro area's population of roughly 100,000 people, and we all believe in the community of Santa Fe. I've spent 9 years in city government doing economic development before joining Yelcast, so have learned a huge amount about how this community works. And if we can build the buzz here and the authenticity, because Santa Fe does have a big name, and that leads to a certain level of skepticism about, the latest shiny product or something. So Yelcast is really working on a foundation of authenticity about the local and having fun. We're trying to add a game layer. So we have been, for about the past 7-8 weeks, doing radio ads, which some of them are very, very funny. And we have a little T-Rex display ad, which its arms growing to click a button that's playing on the local newspaper's website. And all of this is sort of search local, buy local, think about it, and really trying to get people to think about their local economy and what they're prepared to do with that. Now, next month, we're following up with a local pledge in partnership with a couple of the local chambers of commerce here. And we're going to have the pledge be just everybody pledge, especially when spending during the holiday season, when a lot of people spend more money, to try and keep that spending local. And we will have Yelcast will basically underwrite a contest that is attached to the pledge. So the pledge is to the local economy. I will do my part. I will do my best to live local and keep things local during the holiday season. And then Yelcast will offer prizes. We'll offer $20, $50 prizes to people who send requests 4 times through the connection engine.
Okay, great. Now but you're talking about building a local community, talking about the members of that community. That's crazy 1950s talk. Or is it back?
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of a back to basics approach, that you really think about what the substance is and who the substantive people you are, and that you need to buy into something like this, because Yelcast has a gigantic value proposition for both consumers and for local businesses, but we need to get both sides bought in to using it and trying it. And so we are doing this as really it's building a movement. It's building a movement that is based on localism, but as part of my city job, my government job, I worked a lot on buy local awareness, and frankly, awareness only goes so far. And what excites me about Yelcast is it brings the tool to match things up, and the tool that can really take our local economies to the next level and bring the money back, not just because it eliminates the need for SEO and SEM and that expense, but because, well, I use the example of my overly long, skinny kid. The mass market doesn't make pants that fit my child. So if Yelcast is built out enough, I can send a message to anybody who makes clothes, a seamstress in town, and say, hey, what would it take for you to develop a pattern and make me 6 pairs of pants that actually fit my kid, rather than going to this mass market stuff that doesn't fit and I have to take it in and he has to wear his pants short and it's not really good for anybody. But I would pay twice as much. I don't really know what the premium is, but I would pay a lot for pants that fit him. And if we can really make the tool work to match up buyers and sellers, we can invigorate local economies and bring money back home in a way that really hasn't been seen since about the 50s, when this was ground up butcher, baker, candlestick maker.
Well, and that was when we went to mass-produced materials as well as a society. We moved away from going to a local tailor to get clothes made. So once you establish this in Santa Fe, how do you expand? I mean, what's the plan for growing past the Santa Fe experiment, and how will you know the Santa Fe experiment worked?
Well, I think we have some goals, obviously, for Santa Fe in terms of our penetration, in terms of how many people use it and then use it again, and how many connections are made. And so, as obviously, that's all part of our product refinement process and learning about what marketing messages work, which business groups are going to be helpful in other markets. And so, our next step is to really take that learning and expand into, I think we're going to expand into 3 additional markets early next year. The obvious candidate is Albuquerque, because there's a halo effect from Santa Fe. There's a lot of commuters coming from Albuquerque and vice versa, and they are already hearing about Yellowcast. So the awareness halo is sort of spreading out, and all of a sudden we're going to go from a town of 100,000 people to a city of 1 million people. So that's already a nice jump up in scale. And then we're going to be targeting some cities that are both sort of fiercely local, if you will, as Kate described it earlier, and probably have a population of about 500K to 1 million people. And
I suspect I might be sitting in one right now.
You might be.
It's a good one.
You might be. So we actually have our list of candidates, and we're developing our list of criteria on what we think will be a successful sort of next phase of launching. And then beyond that, our goal is really to go for about 10 more after that later in the year. At the same time, we're looking at opportunities where there's context of people, as I think as Kate was very well put it in her example of having somebody who can make something for you or do something for you. And what's changed, I think, since the 50s and 60s is this nature of a on-demand world where.
Well, and we haven't used that term yet, but that is very much what we're talking about. Yes.
That's right. And I think what's interesting about that is, there are people with skills all over the place. How did they promote those skills? Right? Some of these people might be giggers. Some of them might just have some extra time, and they may have a full-time job, but they have a hobby they're passionate about, making pants, for example. So how do they actually get connected in their local market? And actually, you see people at these street fairs and things like that where they sell the stuff that they make. Now, how do you actually create a platform that leverages modern search and communication platforms and make those connections happen? That's part of what we want to try and do.
Well, and it's always been my opinion that the way you make those connections happen is you take the artisanal capability and you find more people who it's going to be attracted to. Strange.
Correct.
Traditional marketing.
Exactly.
But we have been, as we were talking before, moving towards mass standardization so aggressively for the past 50 years that it doesn't seem natural to think about calling somebody to have pants made locally anymore. Yeah. And yet, those are the kinds of things that are starting to happen in the economy. Now, on demand, too, you could have this search capability bring you a car. You could have somebody do your lawn. There's a lot of different.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, services are a huge general category, but it could be anything from, legal services to home services to personal fitness. That's obviously, this goes obviously well beyond products, and this is very well suited for that. So, we're looking for opportunities to partner with people who already have audiences in some of those areas, and then bring our platform to help them make connections. Because right now they're just doing the standard stuff. They're doing advertising. They're media-based models, and we're looking, basically only having people pay when they actually make that connection. So it's actually, it's pay to connect, really.
A lot less waste. Now, the thing that I was talking with you guys about recently that I really loved is you're having a Christmas party for the world's giggers. Tell us about that, too.
Well, for Santa Fe giggers, though, we'd probably invite the world if we can.
Bill said you were going to have a stream, so he said it's a party.
He hasn't told me that idea yet. All right, I'll have to work that into the planning.
I still like it if it's in Santa Fe.
Yeah. Well, in Santa Fe, I mean, as you talk about the artisanal market, obviously Santa Fe is very known for its art market. We have a lot of that. It is a sort of place where our artistry is in the DNA. And what we like about the gig economy is it's not necessarily organized in one place yet. There are different products playing in different areas, but to take it from a local community perspective and say, what skills do you have? and what do you want to be hired for? And then, hey, anybody else who's looking for something from, babysitting to plumbing to roof repair to just somebody to dig a hole for a tree. Santa Fe also has an aging population that is needing
very hard soil too.
It's true, actually, in the desert. But we know it's the future of work. So we really want to celebrate it at Yellcast and have a holiday party for people who don't get a holiday party and really say, hey, we think you're at the forefront of something. We want to get you signed up and discoverable easily on Yellcast and celebrate what you do and bringing your skills, sort of making it more visible in your community so that we can unlock better wages, more work for you, and really just start to get people paid for what they can do. Because the number of times, and people are using traditional social media now to say, does anybody know someone who can? And I see it all the time, whether it's home services or even as simple as a babysitter or a business who will do this. And Yellcast can really answer a lot of that. And we think that the gig economy not only deserves celebration and a really fun party, but that they are a great cohort that will understand and be valuable on Yellcast. So having that holiday party, celebrating the gig economy, kind of ticks a lot of boxes for Yellcast.
Well, we're going to be watching, and I might try to get down for the party to see how that goes. I have talked to so many giggers. I would love to see them being celebrated instead of living in fear.
Yeah.
Right? Yes.
You're here.
So, hey, thanks, guys, for coming on very much and bringing us up to date on Yellcast. And
Thank you, guys.
For the rest of you listening out there in global marketing land, thanks for joining us again for BIA Kelsey Live. Remember, you can join us in Boston to spend some time in person December 5th through 7th at our BIA Kelsey Next show. It's going to be our look forward into 2017, a great opportunity to sit with the analyst team, the BIA Kelsey community, and talk about what is going to happen. Until next week on Thursday, this is BIA Kelsey Live. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. You've had Mike Boland on. Thank you, Kate and Peter, for Yellcast. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks, folks.